Today, we'll be getting into some stories with Toni Storm, Liv Morgan, Roman Reigns, and more. Let's start things off with the biggest and most shocking story over the last few days, and that is the WWE release of Toni Storm. At the time of this recording, the Toni Storm situation is still pretty much a blur. Some reports claim that Toni Storm was burnt out. Some say that it could have been a creative issue. Some reports say that it was other things. But one thing that her release wasn't related to was budget cuts. Over the last few years in WWE, fans are becoming numb to so many big name releases, all happening under the label of budget cuts. Regardless if it was true or not, that's the label that WWE has given a majority of their releases over the last few years. They'll just get rid of anyone and categorize it as budget cuts. But despite the conflicting reports on why Toni is gone, the one thing all reports seem to agree on was that Toni Storm was not released for budget cut reasons. She left under her own power. WWE and Sean Ross reportedly say that Toni Storm was granted her request to be released. But other reports say a much different story and claim that Toni flat out left following the MSG Live event during Christmas weekend. One report claims that following the show, Toni jumped on a flight back home and basically quit without telling anyone. So there was just a big mess of different stories here, so it's hard to say which one is true or not. But what we can do is go over Toni Storm's main roster run, see if we can find the problem there. So Toni Storm gets all these video packages and hype videos leading up to her main roster debut. She finally debuts on SmackDown in mid-July, then immediately disappears for several months after that, clearly showing us that there was no real plans in place for her, despite all the hype for her debut. Toni appears a few months later during a tag team match with Liv Morgan, before disappearing again for several more weeks. As a matter of fact, Toni's most recent feud with Charlotte was the first thing of substance that she did on the main roster. So it took them 5 months of doing nothing with her before putting her in this title feud with Charlotte. It was a bit weird having a #1 contender for the title that you haven't done anything with since her debut. But everyone was happy to see Toni being used, so they looked past that. But then, what happens? Charlotte and Toni's feud for a prestigious WWE Women's Championship turns into a pie-throwing competition. And we talked about this several times when it first happened and how weird and almost childish it was for a championship feud between two highly gifted women's wrestlers to start in that fashion. Instead of building a great story from the ground up around the SmackDown Women's Championship, the story was built around the two women humiliating each other and throwing pies at each other's faces. And that was the moment that really took fans out of the feud. Like we discussed before, a pie-throwing revenge story is something you probably expect to see on a children's show, not a story for a WWE championship. So that part of the feud was highly criticized and ripped apart. But Toni picked up a win over Charlotte that gave her the rights to a title match on the Christmas Eve edition of SmackDown. Toni Storm was unsuccessful in that match. Obviously, no one really expected Toni to win the title spot. No one is really knocking Becky or Charlotte off as a champion right now. But we discussed before how Toni could most likely use this match with Charlotte as a platform to get herself noticed more. Well, fast forward a few more days, and that brings us to Toni's last day in WWE during the Christmas Live events. There was something that happened on this show that you could view as a reason for creative frustration. So what happened there on that live event? It wasn't nationally televised, but during that show, Toni Storm had a backstage moment and an in-ring moment where she was chasing after Dana Brooke for the 24/7 title. And fans think that this probably played a role in Toni's decision to leave. Yes, it is still technically a WWE title, but everyone knows by now what the title is and what it represents. It's a comedic title / we don't know what else to do with you, so here, chase this meaningless title. It's the sad reality of that championship. If you're seen in a group of men and women chasing that title, you get taken less seriously and look comedic. It's basically a way of writing someone off from being taken seriously. Go back to last summer, and that's why fans lost their mind when Jeff Hardy was chasing after the 24/7 title. Here's a man who's a former world champion, wrestled all over the world, a true icon in the industry, and you have him chasing the comedic 24/7 title? Fans felt insulted for Jeff Hardy to go through that. And like we said back then when Jeff Hardy was going through that 24/7 title situation, that title isn't meant for everyone. There's a reason why you won't ever see Bobby Lashley, Roman Reigns, Randy Orton, Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and all these other huge stars chasing after that title. It's because they're above that title. It would be insulting and embarrassing to have any of those big stars chasing after the meaningless title. So you have to put yourself in Toni's shoes and possibly see it through that perspective. I was just on SmackDown fighting for the actual Women's Championship, and now I'm at a live event show chasing around the 24/7 title. What just happened? So, was it a situation where that sort of did it for Toni Storm, where she sat back and was like, they put me in the 24/7 title picture? It must be over. They're never going to properly use me. Let me get out of here. Was it like that? Did it go down like that? Looking from the outside in, you can definitely make that case for creative frustration. She sat backstage for months, had one title match, and now she was running around for the WWE 24/7 title. Did she possibly look at that as the breaking point? Did she see that as them giving up on her? So she gave up on them and quit. No one knows at this current moment. It's all just fan speculation right now. Probably gonna have to wait until Toni tells her full story. But from WWE's perspective, it's another major loss. 26-year-old, young, gifted wrestler, and they probably let her slip through their fingers due to the lack of plans and proper creative direction. Wrestlers are creative people. They envision the best things for their careers and storylines. No one really had a dream of going into WWE to sit around backstage and chase around the 24/7 title. So we'll have to keep our eye for more updates to that story and see how it turns out. Liv Morgan recently took to Twitter to say that it feels like it's meant to be that she'll become Raw Women's Champion. And even though she's not really expected to win, some fans discussed how it would be a nice, genuine, unexpected title win for Liv Morgan. If Liv was to win the title there, it'll be a massive shock because no one would be expecting it. Then she could go back onto her own amazing storylines. Maybe something with Alexa Bliss and other superstars that she crossed paths with in the past. So we'll see if that ever happens. Lastly, with all the rising talk about Drew McIntyre versus Roman Reigns, just a reminder to keep that Battle Royal story on your mind because it's possible that WWE may revisit it. Drew was left out of the massive Battle Royal a few weeks ago, and there was never any payoff for that story besides the fact that Pierce made that list. So if Drew vs. Roman actually happens in the near future, maybe we do get a reveal about what actually happened there, and if Roman asked for Drew to be left out. If that's what happened, it'll be a great starting point for the story because it'll look like Roman does fear Drew McIntyre. But what are your thoughts on today's stories? Leave your comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, guys.